Marcus Chen had been living alone in his mountain cabin for 3 years now, ever since the divorce papers were signed and his old life crumbled to pieces. The isolation suited him perfectly. No neighbors for 20 miles, no cell phone towers, no internet connection. Just him, his books, his wood stove, and the endless forest that stretched beyond his windows. That morning started like any other. Coffee brewed strong and black, bacon sizzling in the cast-iron pan, and the October air crisp enough to fog his breath when he stepped outside to collect firewood. The routine kept him sane, kept him moving forward one day at a time. But when he returned from his wood gathering, arms full of split oak, something felt different. The cabin door stood slightly ajar, though he was certain he had closed it firmly. Mountain winds could be tricky, but his door had a heavy latch that rarely gave way to gusts. Marcus set down the firewood carefully and approached the entrance. His hunting rifle hung on the wall just inside, but something told him this wasn't a bear or a desperate vagrant seeking shelter. The air itself seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't identify, like the moments before a thunderstorm when every hair on his body stood on end. He pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The cabin looked exactly as he had left it, except for one detail that made his blood run cold. Wet footprints crossed his wooden floor, but they weren't human. Each print showed 4 elongated toes ending in what appeared to be sharp points, and they were easily twice the size of his own feet. The prints led from the door to his small kitchen, then toward the back bedroom. Marcus grabbed his rifle from the wall mount, checking the chamber out of habit. Loaded and ready, his hands remained steady despite his racing heart. 3 years of solitary living had taught him to handle unexpected situations with calm precision. Following the strange trail, he noticed other details that didn't belong. A faint, sweet smell hung in the air, like exotic flowers he couldn't name. Droplets of what looked like silver liquid dotted the floor beside the footprints. And strangest of all, his battery-powered radio was playing softly, tuned to a frequency that should have been nothing but static in these mountains. The footprints ended at his bedroom door, which stood open. Marcus raised his rifle and peered around the frame. What he saw there would replay in his memory for the rest of his life. A woman sat on the edge of his bed, but calling her a woman felt inadequate. She stood nearly 7 feet tall even while seated, with skin that seemed to shimmer between pale blue and silver, depending on how the light struck it. Her hair flowed like liquid mercury down her back, and her eyes were the color of deep ocean water, larger than any human eyes had a right to be. She wore what appeared to be a form-fitting suit, made of some material that looked like woven starlight. Every few seconds, patterns of light would pulse across the fabric in mesmerizing waves. In her hands she held what looked like a small device covered in symbols that glowed and shifted as she manipulated it. But the most striking thing about her was her expression of pure terror. The moment their eyes met, her mouth opened in a soundless scream. The device in her hands began flashing rapidly, casting wild shadows across the room. She leaped to her feet with inhuman grace and backed against the far wall, her breathing rapid and panicked. Marcus lowered his rifle immediately, raising one hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said softly, the way he might speak to a frightened animal. "I'm not going to hurt you." But his words seemed to have the opposite effect. The woman's eyes grew even wider, and she began speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes mixed with rushing water. The device in her hands now pulsed with urgent red light, and she kept glancing between him and what he assumed was some kind of scanner or communicator. "Please," Marcus said, setting his rifle down completely and backing toward the doorway. "I don't know who you are or how you got here, but you're safe. I won't hurt you." The woman pressed herself further against the wall, her otherworldly features twisted with what could only be described as absolute terror. She spoke again in her musical language, and this time Marcus thought he detected pleading in her voice. The device in her hands began emitting a high-pitched whine that made his teeth ache. Then, without warning, she simply vanished. Not like she ran past him or dove through a window. She literally disappeared from one moment to the next, leaving only the faint scent of those unknown flowers and a small puddle of silver liquid where she had been standing. The radio fell silent, returning to static, and the oppressive energy that had filled the air dissipated like morning fog. Marcus stood in his empty bedroom for several minutes, wondering if he was losing his mind. 3 years of isolation could do things to a person's mental state, he knew. Hallucinations weren't unheard of among hermits and mountain dwellers. But the silver liquid on his floor was real enough, and the wet footprints throughout his cabin told a story his rational mind struggled to accept. He knelt beside the puddle and dipped one finger into the strange substance. It felt cool and somehow alive, with a consistency unlike any liquid he had ever encountered. When he lifted his finger, the silver material stretched like liquid mercury, but with an almost gel-like quality. The moment it lost contact with the main puddle, it simply evaporated, leaving no trace on his skin. The footprints led back to his front door and continued outside, but they ended abruptly in his small yard, as if their maker had simply stepped off the face of the earth. Marcus followed them as far as he could, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement, but the forest remained as silent and empty as ever. Back inside, he examined every inch of his cabin. Nothing was missing, nothing was damaged, and nothing was out of place except for those impossible footprints and the rapidly evaporating silver residue. The only other evidence of his strange visitor was his radio, which now refused to pick up anything but static, no matter how he adjusted the antenna. That night, Marcus sat by his wood stove with a cup of whiskey, staring at the spots where the footprints had been. His rational mind offered explanations. Stress-induced hallucination, a vivid dream confused with waking reality. Some kind of elaborate prank. Though who could have orchestrated such a thing in his isolated location remained a mystery. But deep in his gut, he knew what he had seen was real. The woman's terror had been genuine, and her fear seemed specifically directed at him rather than her surroundings. She had reacted to his presence as if he were the monster in this scenario, not her. As he prepared for bed, Marcus found himself checking the locks on his doors and windows for the first time since moving to the cabin. Not because he feared the strange woman would return, but because he couldn't shake the feeling that her terror might have been justified. If beings existed who could appear and disappear at will, who possessed technology that seemed like magic, what did it mean that one of them was afraid of him? The last thing he noticed before sleep claimed him was that his battery-powered clock had stopped working, its digital display frozen at the exact time he had first encountered his impossible visitor. Outside his windows, the October night seemed darker and more silent than usual, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Marcus Chen had spent 3 years running from his old life, seeking peace in isolation. But peace, he was beginning to realize, might be the last thing he was going to find. Something had found him in his mountain refuge, something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. And tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to convince himself it had all been a dream, or accept that his quiet life of solitude had just become infinitely more complicated. 3 days passed without incident. But Marcus couldn't return to his normal routine. Every shadow in his peripheral vision made him turn. Every unusual sound from the forest set his nerves on edge. He had convinced himself multiple times that the encounter was nothing more than a stress-induced breakdown, but the broken radio and the stopped clock served as persistent reminders that something impossible had happened in his cabin. On the 4th morning, she returned. Marcus was outside splitting wood when he heard the familiar humming in the air. The forest around him fell silent. not gradually but all at once, as if someone had thrown a switch. Birds stopped singing mid-song, insects ceased their buzzing, and even the wind through the trees died away completely. The only sound was the rhythmic thunk of his axe meeting wood. He set down the axe and turned slowly toward his cabin. She stood about 50 feet away, partially concealed behind a massive pine tree. Only her head and one shoulder were visible, but there was no mistaking those impossible blue eyes and mercury hair. This time, however, she wasn't looking at him with terror. Her expression showed intense curiosity, mixed with what might have been scientific fascination. In her hands was the same device from before, but now it displayed a steady blue light instead of the frantic red flashing. She held it pointed in his direction like some kind of scanner, occasionally making small adjustments to controls he couldn't see clearly. Marcus remained perfectly still, afraid that any sudden movement might send her fleeing again. For several minutes, they simply observed each other across the clearing. He began to notice details he had missed during their first encounter. Her movements were too fluid, too graceful to be entirely humanoid. When she shifted position, it was with the flowing motion of something that might be equally at home in water or air as on land. The device in her hands began emitting soft musical tones, almost like a melody, but more complex and layered than any human composition. She listened to these sounds intently, occasionally nodding as if receiving information. Then, to Marcus's amazement, she stepped out from behind the tree and began walking slowly toward him. Each step was deliberate and careful, as if she were approaching a dangerous wild animal. Her eyes never left his face, and he could see her hand positioned over what he assumed were controls on her device, ready to activate whatever had made her disappear the first time. When she was about 20 feet away, she stopped and spoke in her wind chime language. The device translated her words almost immediately, projecting them into the air in accented but clear English. "You are the human called Marcus Chen," the translated voice said. "You are alone in this dwelling. You pose no immediate threat to this observer." Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. "You know my name?" The woman tilted her head at an angle no human neck could achieve, studying him with renewed interest. She spoke again, and the translation followed. "Your identity was determined through analysis of personal items and documents within your dwelling. This observer was required to verify that you are indeed the sole occupant of this remote location." "Sole occupant of—" Marcus began, then stopped. "Wait, you were looking for me specifically?" She nodded, a gesture that seemed strangely human despite her alien nature. "Affirmative. This observer has been searching for an isolated human subject for 47 of your solar rotations. Your dwelling was identified as suitable for extended observation." The implications of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. 47 days? You've been watching me for 47 days? Observation commenced when you completed repairs to your dwelling's roof structure. Your behavioral patterns indicated psychological stability and minimal social contact. These factors made you an ideal candidate for this study. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "What kind of study?" The woman spoke at length in her musical language, and the device seemed to struggle with the translation, offering fits and starts of English. "Behavioral analysis, human adaptation to isolation, psychological resilience patterns, comparison to similar species across, translation incomplete, galactic territories." "You're studying me like a lab rat," Marcus said, his voice flat. The woman's head tilted again, and she made what might have been a gesture of confusion. "Translation uncertain. Clarification. This observer is conducting ethological research on human solitary behavior patterns. Your species demonstrates unusual psychological characteristics when separated from social groups." "Unusual how?" "Most intelligent species experience rapid mental deterioration when isolated from their communities. Humans show remarkable adaptability to solitary existence while maintaining cognitive function and emotional stability. This trait is unique among known sentient races. Marcus stared at her, trying to process what he was hearing. You're saying other intelligent species can't handle being alone? Correct. Prolonged isolation typically results in madness, self-destruction, or complete cognitive collapse within days or weeks. Humans can endure months or years of solitude while continuing to function, create, and even thrive. This characteristic has been noted by the Galactic Council as worthy of detailed study. Galactic Council, Marcus repeated. Right. Of course there's a Galactic Council. The woman stepped closer, her device now humming with what sounded like excitement. This observer was specifically chosen for this assignment due to her expertise in xenopsychology and adaptive behavior studies. However, direct contact was not intended. Your species is classified as pre-contact, and interference with your natural development is strictly prohibited. Then why are you talking to me now? For the first time, something that might have been embarrassment crossed her features. This observer's cloaking technology malfunctioned during the previous encounter. When you detected her presence, protocols dictated immediate withdrawal. However, analysis of the interaction revealed that you displayed no aggressive behavior despite clear territorial intrusion. This deviation from expected human responses required further investigation. Marcus couldn't help but laugh, a sound that made the alien woman step back slightly. You expected me to attack you? Human territorial behavior is well documented in our databases. Discovery of an intruder in your dwelling should have triggered aggressive defensive responses. Instead, you displayed what our behavioral models classify as protective and calming behaviors. This contradiction requires explanation. I'm not exactly a typical human, Marcus said. I moved out here specifically to avoid other people. The woman's eyes seemed to brighten with interest. Voluntary isolation is noted in your psychological profile. However, your behavioral responses indicate positive social conditioning rather than misanthropic tendencies. This observer is curious about the contradiction. Marcus found himself relaxing despite the surreal nature of the conversation. You want to know why someone who likes people chooses to live alone? Affirmative. Your species typically requires social interaction for psychological health, yet you have thrived in isolation. Additionally, your response to this observer's presence suggests maintained empathy and communication skills despite extended solitude. These factors do not align with current xenopsychological models. Maybe your models are wrong, Marcus suggested. The woman made a sound that the translator couldn't interpret, though it reminded Marcus of laughter. This observer has reached similar conclusions. Human psychology appears far more complex and adaptable than existing research indicates. Direct observation has revealed numerous discrepancies between theoretical models and actual behavior. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Do you disappear again and continue watching me from the shadows? The woman hesitated, consulting her device and speaking rapidly in her own language. The translator remained silent, suggesting she was thinking aloud rather than communicating. Finally, she looked at him directly. This observer faces an unprecedented situation. Direct contact has already occurred, violating prime observation protocols. However, terminating the study would result in loss of valuable data that could reshape understanding of human psychology. A decision must be made. What kind of decision? Whether to report the contact violation and face disciplinary action or continue the research under modified parameters. She paused, then added something that made Marcus's heart race. There is a third option, which is voluntary cooperation. If the human subject consents to participate in structured research, the study could continue with full disclosure rather than covert observation. This would provide far more accurate data while respecting the subject's autonomy. Marcus stared at her, understanding dawning slowly. "You're asking if I want to help you study myself." "Affirmative." Though this observer acknowledges the request is highly irregular and likely without precedent in galactic research protocols. The forest around them remained unnaturally silent as Marcus considered her proposal. 3 days ago, his biggest concern was whether to order supplies before winter set in. Now, an alien researcher was asking him to become a willing participant in a study that could apparently influence how an entire galactic civilization understood humanity. "If I say yes," he said slowly, "what exactly would that involve?" The woman's expression brightened noticeably. "Structured interviews regarding human psychology and behavior. Observation of daily routines with your full knowledge and consent. Analysis of human problem-solving techniques and emotional responses to various stimuli. In return, this observer could provide information about galactic civilization, other intelligent species, and technological innovations that might benefit your research." "My research?" "This observer has noted extensive libraries within your dwelling, including texts on psychology, philosophy, and anthropology. You appear to be conducting your own studies on human nature, albeit from a personal rather than scientific perspective." Marcus realized she was right. His 3 years of isolation had indeed been a kind of self-study, an attempt to understand himself and humanity in general. The irony wasn't lost on him that an alien had recognized this when he himself had never consciously acknowledged it. "I need time to think about this," he said. The woman nodded. "Understandable. This observer will return in 24 hours for your decision. During that time, no observation will be conducted to allow you privacy for consideration." "Thank you," Marcus said, meaning it. The woman activated something on her device, and the familiar energy shimmer began to surround her. "One final clarification, Marcus Chen. This observer's initial fear was not of you personally, but of the consequences of contact violation. Your species has a reputation for both great wisdom and great danger. Meeting a human face-to-face for the first time was overwhelming." Before Marcus could respond, she was gone again, leaving him alone in the sudden return of forest sounds. But this time, her departure felt different. Not like an escape, but like a promise. As he walked back to his cabin, Marcus Chen realized that his life of peaceful isolation was officially over. The only question now was whether he was ready for whatever came next. Marcus spent the night staring at his ceiling, turning the alien woman's proposal over in his mind, like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. By morning, he had filled 3 notebook pages with questions, concerns, and half-formed thoughts about what cooperation might mean. The practical part of his brain listed obvious concerns. How could he trust someone who had been secretly watching him for weeks? What guarantee did he have that this wasn't some elaborate first contact protocol designed to evaluate humanity's readiness for galactic society? And what happened if he learned things that no human was supposed to know? But another part of him, the part that had driven him to earn a doctorate in anthropology before his life fell apart, was fascinated beyond measure. The opportunity to study an alien culture while simultaneously helping them understand humanity was the kind of chance that came once in a species' lifetime. How could he possibly turn it down? When she appeared the next morning, Marcus was ready with his answer and about 50 questions. She materialized near the tree line just after sunrise, approaching his cabin with the same careful deliberation as before. This time, however, she carried what appeared to be a second device, smaller than her translator but covered in similar glowing symbols. "I accept," Marcus said before she could speak. "But I have conditions." The woman's head tilted in that impossible way, and her translator rendered what sounded like approval. "Conditional acceptance is logically sound. Please state your requirements." "First, I want to know your name, or at least what I can call you. I'm not calling you observer for however long this takes." She made that sound that might have been laughter again. This individual is designated Research Specialist Zara Cathren 9, Informal Communications. However, the closest approximation in your language would be Kira. This designation carries appropriate meaning regarding curiosity and discovery. Kira, Marcus repeated. I can work with that. Second condition, I want to know exactly what you're planning to study and how. No surprises, no hidden agendas. Kira consulted her device, speaking briefly in her own language before the translator responded. Acceptable. Primary research objectives include human adaptation to isolation, emotional regulation mechanisms, problem-solving approaches under stress, and creative output during extended solitude. Secondary objectives involve human responses to contact with non-terrestrial intelligence and capacity for interspecies cooperation. And the methods? Daily interviews regarding your thoughts, experiences, and decision-making processes. Behavioral observation during routine activities with your full knowledge. Introduction of controlled variables to test adaptive responses. Analysis of your creative works, both existing and future productions. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. Creative works? You mean my journals? Affirmative, though only with explicit consent. Human artistic and literary expression during isolation provides crucial data about psychological resilience. Your written materials represent 3 years of documented adaptation to solitary existence. Third condition, Marcus said, warming to the negotiation. This goes both ways. I want to learn about you, your people, and how you see humanity. If I'm helping you write a report about us, I want to understand the context. For the first time, Kira seemed genuinely surprised. You wish to conduct reciprocal research? Exactly. You study me, I study you. We both learn something. Kira was quiet for several minutes, consulting both of her devices and apparently having a rapid conversation with herself in her musical language. Finally, she looked at Marcus with what he was beginning to recognize as her version of a smile. This proposal has merit and could significantly enhance research outcomes. However, it requires authorization from this observer's superiors. Such reciprocal study arrangements are unprecedented in pre-contact research. How long would that take? Unknown. Communication with the research vessel requires transmission through quantum-entangled relay nodes. Response time could range from hours to days, depending on current mission parameters. Marcus considered this. What if we start with the basics while we wait for authorization? You can begin your human studies, and I can ask general questions about galactic civilization. Nothing too sensitive until your people give the okay. Kira's expression brightened considerably. Acceptable compromise. This observer has full authority to begin Phase 1 research protocols immediately. Then let's start, Marcus said. But first I need coffee and breakfast. And you look like you could use somewhere to sit down. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself in the most surreal situation of his life. Sitting at his kitchen table across from a 7-foot-tall alien woman, both of them drinking coffee and sharing scrambled eggs, while her translation device provided simultaneous interpretation of their conversation. The eggs are compatible with your biology? Marcus asked, fascinated by the careful way Kira approached each bite. This observer's species evolved from omnivorous stock similar to your own. Most terrestrial proteins are digestible, though some require enzymatic supplements. She paused to consult her device. The coffee beverage contains stimulants that affect this observer's nervous system more intensely than typical human responses. Very interesting sensation. You've never had caffeine before? Negative. This observer's species developed alternatives to stimulant consumption for alertness enhancement. The human approach is surprisingly effective. Marcus made a note in his journal. First research observation. Aliens get buzzed on coffee. This is going to be fascinating. Over the next several hours, they established a routine that would define their collaboration. Kira asked detailed questions about Marcus's daily habits, his emotional responses to isolation, and his methods for maintaining mental health during extended solitude. In return, Marcus learned about the vast galactic community that existed beyond Earth's awareness. "How many species are we talking about?" Marcus asked during their afternoon session. "The current Galactic Council recognizes 2,147 sentient species across 15,000 inhabited systems. However, this number represents only those civilizations that have achieved interstellar travel and diplomatic recognition. Conservative estimates suggest 50,000 to 100,000 additional pre-contact species exist throughout the galaxy." Marcus set down his pen, overwhelmed. "And humans are just one of the pre-contact groups?" "Affirmative. Your species shows significant potential but lacks the technological development and social cohesion required for council membership. Current projections suggest human readiness for contact within 200 to 500 Earth years. What would change that timeline?" Kira hesitated, consulting her device. "Accelerated technological development, resolution of global conflicts, establishment of unified planetary governance, and demonstration of sustainable resource management. However, premature contact often results in civilizational collapse or aggressive expansion that threatens galactic stability." "Have you seen that happen?" This observer has studied 47 pre-contact species during her career. Of those, 12 achieved successful integration into galactic society, 23 remain under observation with potential for future contact, 8 destroyed themselves before achieving interstellar capability, and 4 required intervention to prevent aggressive expansion. The weight of that statistic settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. "What kind of intervention?" "Technological limitation, resource restriction, or in extreme cases, quarantine protocols. The galaxy cannot permit aggressive species to threaten established civilizations." Marcus understood the implication. Humanity was being evaluated not just for readiness to join galactic society, but for whether they posed a threat that might require containment. The research Kira was conducting could influence Earth's entire future. "That's why human psychology is so important to understand," he said. "You need to know if we're going to be friends or enemies." Partially correct. However, this observer's research suggests that humans possess unique psychological characteristics that could benefit galactic civilization significantly. Your species' adaptability, resilience, and capacity for individual function may represent solutions to problems that have challenged the Council for millennia. "What kind of problems?" Kira was quiet for a moment, clearly considering how much to reveal. "Most intelligent species are highly social creatures that require constant community interaction for psychological stability. This creates limitations in exploration, research, and frontier development. Humans appear capable of maintaining mental health and productivity during extended isolation, making your species uniquely suited for long-term space exploration and colony establishment." The implications hit Marcus like lightning. "You're not just studying human psychology, you're evaluating whether we'd make good galactic pioneers." "Among other applications, yes. Human psychological resilience could revolutionize how the galaxy approaches deep space exploration, scientific research stations, and frontier colony development." Marcus realized that his 3 years of mountain solitude might represent far more than personal healing. He could be providing data that would shape humanity's role in a galactic community beyond his wildest imagination. That evening, as they concluded their first full day of formal research, Kira received the authorization she had been waiting for. Her device chimed with complex musical tones, and she spent several minutes reading what appeared to be an extensive message in her flowing alien script. "The Research Council has approved reciprocal study protocols," she announced. "This observer is authorized to share general information about galactic civilization, xenopsychology principles, and comparative species analysis in exchange for detailed human psychological data. What changed their minds? Your proposal demonstrated sophisticated understanding of research ethics and scientific methodology. Additionally, preliminary data from today's session suggests that direct cooperation may yield insights impossible to achieve through covert observation. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. So we're officially research partners now? Affirmative, though this observer must note that such arrangements remain unprecedented in Council history. We are essentially conducting experimental diplomacy along with xenopsychological research. As Kira prepared to leave that evening, Marcus realized that his quiet life of self-imposed exile had transformed into something extraordinary. He was no longer just a man hiding from his past in a mountain cabin. He had become humanity's first unofficial ambassador to a galactic civilization, and the success or failure of his cooperation with Kira might influence Earth's destiny for generations to come. Same time tomorrow? Marcus asked, as she activated her cloaking device. Affirmative. This observer looks forward to continuing our mutual research endeavors. As she disappeared into the gathering darkness, Marcus Chen sat on his porch and looked up at the stars with new understanding. Somewhere among those distant lights, an entire galaxy of intelligent beings was watching and waiting to see what humanity would become. And somehow, improbably, he had been chosen to help write the first chapter of that story. The stranger in his cabin had indeed disappeared at the sight of him, but she had returned with an offer that would change everything. Tomorrow, their real work would begin.